So this month's Visual Studio Challenge is to create an application for desktop or for phone that makes use of the Microsoft Advertising SDK, which sounds intimidating but is actually very straightforward. So let's start by going to pubcenter.microsoft.com, because what we need to do is we need to set up your PubCenter account and we need to create an ad unit. So for the PubCenter, you can use any Microsoft account to log in, and I recommend you use whatever account you're using for the store, because what this will do is, by using the same account for both the store and for PubCenter, you're going to make it easier on yourself and not have to remember a whole bunch of different ones. You're keeping everything located together. So creating an ad unit is very, very simple. You'll be presented with a few screens to set up your account, adding personal details, billing addresses, that sort of thing. So go through that, and then once you get to this main PubCenter page, we can see that there's a big button here that's monetize new app. So we're going to click on that. At which point we're going to declare if the app is for Windows Phone or for Windows. Currently, you have to target an app to a device. So if you have if you're creating a UWP app, you're going to need to create two sets of ads. You're going to need to handle that in app as to which one is which. So for this example, we're going to use the Windows desktop because it's easier to set up and there's fewer contracts that you're going to need to implement. So we're going to select that. Now for your app name, this can be anything. This is it should match the app you're building. So whatever your app's name is, you should be doing it here. What I'm going to call this one is, I'm just going to call it DevMov Ad SDK. And for the ad unit, we need to give it a unique name within our own structure. So this isn't going to affect anything. This is just to identify the actual unit itself. So I like to use whatever I've called my app name, my platform, and then I like to put in the size, because each sized ad is going to have a different ad unit, and this has to do with the fact the way the Microsoft servers feed you your ad content, so you want to make sure that's the same. And then for category, it's a good idea to target based on what your app category is, so that the ads relate to the category, because the idea is a business user is going to want to see business ads. They're more likely to click on it, and if they're going to tap on them, then you're going to get more revenue. So we're going to pick whichever one of these feels closest to what you're submitting for the store. So I'll just pick business for now, and then we click save. Okay, so what we're going to need to do is, once that's saved, scroll over and look here, and you'll see the application ID and the ad unit ID. And these are very important because they're how you're going to target the ad in your application. So you're going to want to leave this open for a moment. Now, at that point, you're going to want to open Visual Studio. And in Visual Studio, what we want to do is we're going to create a new project. And obviously, we're going to do Visual C# because that's my language of choice. And here you can choose a Windows Universal app or a Windows 8 app. I recommend for this example, we're going to use Windows 8, and we're going to target a Windows app. We just need a blank app. Now, if you're going to continue with this app and make it into a full-fledged app and put it into the store, you'll want to target the appropriate platforms, of course. So at this point, we're just going to call this like we called it in the ad in PubCenter. So we're going to create this app. So once the app's created here, we've got our basis. It's actually fairly simple what we want to do. You can see here we've got a couple of references already in here, but we're going to come in here, we're going to add a reference. So what we want is the extensions. Now, depending on your version of Visual Studio, you should already have the Microsoft Advertising SDK for Windows 8.1. You're going to want to target the appropriate one for your system. So if you're doing a Windows 8 app, obviously you'll target Windows 8 XAML. I'm going to target Windows 8.1. And OK. So that creates our reference. Now what we want to do is go into our main page. The first thing we need to do is the add controls are not accessible by default. What we need to do is we actually have to bring in the XML namespace, and you can use any kind of name you want for this. I like to call it advert just so that I know what I'm targeting. And from here we need to come down in this list and we're gonna get the Microsoft Advertising WinRT UI. And so the line will look like this. Now what this does is we're using that namespace to tell the system that when we use the advert keyword, we're going to be targeting the advertising namespace. At which point we come in and make use of an add control. So the add control, we're going to need to put in 4 things here. We're going to need our application ID, which we'll fill in a moment, our add unit ID, we need a height, and we need a width. Now for our height and width, this is based on the control that we chose. Now in my example here, I picked to build a 160 by 600 ad. So what that means is that I have to make sure that my ad will match that properly. And for the application, and the reason for this is because the ad that you're going to be given from the server based on that ad ID is going to be of that size. And if you pick the wrong size, then you'll end up with either shrinking the ad to fit, or you're going to end up with white space. And that's just not very good user experience. People aren't going to see what the ad is. It's not going to look very good. So we want to make sure they match. Now then, if you remember from our example here, we have our application ID and our ad unit ID. Normally these values would go into these spaces. However, one of the things with the Microsoft Pub Center and advertising is that it takes a little bit of time for it to associate those values on their end. So for this example, to get your screenshot, you're going to use testing values. And what the testing values are for is they are specifically for a situation where you want to make sure you put the control in correctly and that it's going to be, nice and clean and good. And this is very, very important. We can find these values here with the test mode values add control for Windows 8.1. And all testing uses the same application ID. So we're going to grab that value and we're going to come back over to our Visual Studio to put it into the application ID. And be sure you get rid of that space if you grabbed one. It should be no spaces in here. Now the add unit ID, however, is dependent on another value based on which ad you're using. So if you're using an image ad, which is at 160 by 600, like I did, you're going to want to use this value. So grab the appropriate value out of the list. Okay, so now you can see we've created our ad control, we've added our values, and we're going to test this. So what will happen is, by default, your application has access to the app contract or to the application contract under package manifest, you have access to the internet capability, and this is required for ads to work in Windows apps. So if you're using a phone, it uses different values. So as you can see here, our application's now running. We've got the blank space where the ad is going to go, and we can see that, oh, I set my height and my width wrong. This is why it's a good idea to test these things. So this is an easy fix in that we're going to go back, we're going to stop our debug, and it's a matter of just switching them. So you can see why it's very important to test and why those values are important to have. And if we rerun the application, now we see that everything looks good. And this is what we need to grab for our print screen.